Is Chip Kelly smarter than that?
I mean, I'm not sure what they're going to do. I really don't know what Chip is going to do. I mean, I would assume there's enough scuttlebutt about Byron Maxwell that there's enough smoke that there ought to be probably is fire there. And people who are reporting this in far more depth than I am insist that Maxwell and the Eagles, the Maxwell's a possibility for the Eagles. And that's, I don't have no reason to doubt that. As far as the rest of that goes, who knows? I mean, we're all trying to kind of take what little nuggets Chip allows us to have and kind of piece them together in figuring out what he's going to do. So I think anybody who tries to say, hey, this is definitively what the Eagles are going to do once free agency begins and once the draft rolls around is, kind of selling you swampland in Florida. They don't really know.
Mike Sielski, columnist at the Philadelphia Inquirer, Philly.com. The title, which we know most times that you guys do not write, suggests that this is a very Belichick-like plan, except for one main missing piece. The Eagles don't have a quarterback, so without that particular position being filled, can this plan work?
No, I don't think it can, and I think that's why it's logical to assume that Chip is going to do everything he can to get Marcus Mariota in this draft. The premise of what I wrote was that there are going to be a ton of theories out there about what Chip is doing and why he's doing it. And here was one that seemed plausible to me based on the little bit of information and evidence we have, which is that Todd Herremans has said publicly that Chip values the quarterback and the offensive line more than any other positions on offense. So if you take that as one puzzle piece, and then you take another puzzle piece that he knows and admires Bill Belichick, okay, well, how did Belichick build the Patriots into the dynasty that they've become? One, he got Tom Brady, and he got lucky in getting Tom Brady, drafting him in the 6th round. But Brady's been there virtually every step of the way, and he has solidified and made sure that the offensive line was solid over the duration of Brady's career. The players who have spent the most time with the Patriots on offense, other than Brady, are 3 other offensive linemen and a running back. So that shows you the value that Belichick places on the offensive line. So if Kelly is that admiring of what Belichick has done, then it makes sense to think, okay, he's going to try to solidify the offensive line, which he's already kind of done by extending Jason Kelsey and Jason Peters in the first year that he was here, and then in trying to get Mariota, I would think.
Yeah, a lot of people feel that that Mariota's going to be the guy, that they're going to do whatever they can. And then there's the argument of, well, you got to build through the draft. You can't give up everything to go get this guy, and you can't build in free agency. It seems that Chip doesn't agree with those two philosophies. I have to build in free agencies, and I might have to give up draft picks to go get my guy. But if you get your guy and he turns out to be your guy, is it worth mortgaging all what they're going to have to do to move up?
Well, look, Chip, we know, regards the draft as a crapshoot. He said as much last year to Peter King from Sports Illustrated. His basic argument was, look, if everybody knew that Tom Brady was going to turn into possibly the greatest quarterback in NFL history, he wouldn't have been a 6th-round pick in 2000. So, all you can do is make your judgments and, roll the dice and not count on your draft picks to come on right away and improve your football team instantaneously. So if you look at it that way, he might say to himself, I know Marcus Mariota better than I know any player in this draft. I know he's going to be a terrific quarterback. I will give up whatever I have to give up to get him because I'm more certain that he will be great than I am of any other player in this draft. Look, we don't know what Chip is going to do. I mean, this is a guy who rewrote the book on how to practice and how to prepare and how athletes should eat and train and all those sorts of things. So the idea that he's going to follow a conventional wisdom in building a team, I think that's the one thing we can say he won't do. I think he's going to be open to doing things in an unorthodox fashion. And I think going all in to try to get Mariota, even when people say, hey, you can't do it, you don't have enough to get him, it shouldn't be off the table for Chip.
Mike Sielski, columnist of the Philadelphia Inquirer, Philly.com. Mike, when Andy Reid was starting to not win games, he got labeled the smartest guy in the room, and that wasn't a good thing. Do we think Chip Kelly is going down a similar path?
Well, I think every football coach thinks he's the smartest guy in the room. Otherwise, they wouldn't be in that position. I think what we're dealing with is what you're getting at is the question of whether giving one coach / executive all the power in choosing the players and then coaching them is the right way for a franchise to go. Pardon me, Andy had that power after only a few years, and it worked for a while until it started to not work. Chip's gotten it at a much earlier stage than Andy got it. Andy got it about 4 years in, I think 3 or 4 years in. Chip got it after 2. So it remains to be seen whether it's going to work. I mean, if Chip is really a genius and is really as brilliant as everybody who has observed him up until he came to Philadelphia seems to suggest he is, then this will work out great for the Eagles. If he's not, then they'll crash and burn. And, from my perspective, the risk here is minimal in a way for Jeffrey Lurie because the franchise has never won a Super Bowl. They haven't won a championship since 1960. What's the value in trying to do it the way that the Eagles have always done it, or in the way, if you're going to emulate anybody, go ahead and hire somebody who's either doing things completely new and differently or wants to emulate Bill Belichick. I mean, that's a pretty good way to go.
Mike, you chronicle in the piece that Trent Cole, Kerry Williams, Todd Herman, James Casey, and obviously LaShawn McCoy are all gone. If the Eagles are following the model that you map out here, what does that mean for Nick Foles?
Well, I think, and I don't know that I would agree with this, but I think it means that they're going to try to find if you're going after Marcus Mariota, it means Nick Foles is not going to be the starting quarterback for this team. He's entering the last year of his rookie deal, which the Eagles apparently, nobody has reported that there's been any overture, from the Eagles to Foles or from Foles to the Eagles to extend this contract. And if I were Nick Foles, I'm looking at this saying, well, if I'm going to enter the season as a starting quarterback, I don't want to be there. I don't want to put my body on the line, during this season without a new deal on the table. I would want an extension because if I get hurt, then I don't have anything. So it certainly seems to me that, at this point you have to think that their faith in Nick Foles or their trust in Nick Foles isn't very high. Now maybe, I may turn out to be completely wrong about that and they're just waiting to do the contract extension with Nick Foles, but, there's been no indication of that so far. And you would think if they really thought that he was their really short-term answer, that they would have extended him, another year or two by now.
And then there's the whole Maclin thing. I mean, you think he's looking around and thinking, like, which of these kids are doing their own thing? I mean, I don't fit into this whole piece anymore. It almost seems like it's Andy Reid's guys against what Chip Kelly wants to do all of a sudden. Or you were a Howie Roseman guy, and that's certainly not going to fit, so you're out of here too. Do you think Maclin now fits in this 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle?
Well, I think he's looking, and I think all players are like this. Look, he wants to be here. He had his most productive season last year. And that's all fine and good. But the other aspect to this, too, is that players are generally going to go to teams who pay them the most money. And, I think the factor that you have to take into consideration here is if Kelly is using Belichick as a model and the Patriots as a model, the Patriots don't commit long-term big dollars to wide receivers. They might commit short-term big dollars to wide receivers, and they might commit long-term reasonable dollars to wide receivers like they did with Wes Welker, but they're not going to break the bank to keep a wide receiver, in New England. And so, that might explain why Jeremy Maclin is unsigned at this point. It might be looking around. So, we'll see how this shakes out. Tomorrow if Jeremy Maclin, signs with the Eagles for a 5-year deal, again, I look like an idiot, but I'm just trying to go on like I wrote in the piece, you only have so many jigsaw puzzles to try to put together and figure out what the entire picture looks like. So I can only go on what we know so far.
Yeah, and one of the questions over at Philly.com in the piece asked the question, does Chip have the Eagles on the right course? Obviously it seems like a lot of people are at least intrigued. Are you surprised that there hasn't been as much backlash? I feel like people are almost okay with this McCoy trade. Maybe they liked McCoy, but they understand it. Almost like Chip has people brainwashed to say, you know what, I trust you. You could. It's almost him and Henke have put some potion over the city. I don't know what they've done, but it seems like there is not as much anger about a deal with such a high-profile player as you may have envisioned in the past.
Well, I think part of that is a function of where we are with sports and following sports in society now. You know, everybody wants to be a GM now who follows sports, and everybody is aware of how much money players make and how much money under the salary cap teams are. And they're much more attuned to that because there's much more coverage of it from the internet and blogs and newspapers and ESPN and all that stuff. So, you know, it's easier, I think, for fans to understand, okay, why is the team doing this? Shady's going to count $12 million against the cap this year. And if you look at the statistics and the research, running back is a position that players start to decline once they turn 27, and Shady is 26. So, okay, you can understand why Kelly wants to get out from under that contract before Shady really starts to decline. But that's in contrast to kind of the emotional, visceral way that we in the Philadelphia area react to our sports teams, which is, why aren't they doing everything they possibly can do to try to win this championship tomorrow? So I do think there's kind of a cultural debate going on in the Philadelphia area, and I do think that Chip and Sam Hinkie are at the nexus of that debate. I mean, people who don't like what the Sixers are doing really don't like what the Sixers are doing, but people who do really like it. They say, okay, this is the way that the franchise can finally win a championship and finally be great and finally be relevant. So it's really an interesting time in Philadelphia sports, and Kelly and Hinkie are right at the center of that.
It really is, and it seems interesting because Kelly has done a lot of similar things that Reed did that Reed got hammered for, and now Kelly is being applauded for. You know, when Hugh Douglas got cut, and then, of course, there was Troy Vincent and Bobby Taylor, and then Lito and Sheldon after that, and Trey Thomas and John Runyon. They were unpopular cuts that were smart decisions. You wonder if Chip Kelly has made smart decisions or business decisions with what he's done.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to how times have changed. I mean, you're talking about when Reed made those decisions, that was 10, 11, 12 years ago. We weren't quite as attuned to the financial and salary cap ramifications of those deals. Remember, at the time, Joe Banner was really kind of pioneering that way of thinking of, hey, get rid of a guy a year too early rather than a year too late, and suffer through some roster turnover for the sake of not getting stuck with a guy who can't play anymore, who costs you a lot of money. You know, a lot of teams, including the Patriots, have adopted that way of doing business. So I think there's a bit more of a cushion for Chip to take that approach nowadays compared to when Reed and Banner did it a decade ago.
So we're suggesting that Joe Banner and Andy Reid were so far ahead of the curve that maybe they were right all along. Maybe we should have let them continue on their path. You know, because I remember Jeffrey Lurie when he was talking about the day he fired Reid, he had said, I want to find a guy who, when he's doing things that people want to change to do what he's doing, and then once they change, he's on to something new. He was really about finding an innovative guy, and obviously it seems like he has ultimate trust to allow Kelly to almost do whatever it is he wants to do. Could you imagine that someone would have this much power so fast? I mean, has Kelly got too much too fast, or is it warranted?
Well, I think there's two different perspectives on that. I think there's the national perspective, which tends to look at Kelly more as Lurie does, the innovator, the guy who you say, this is somebody doing something differently and the way nobody else has done it, and it's worked at every level he's been at, and you give him the room to do what he needs to do, and you give him the freedom to do what he needs to do. Then there's the more Philadelphian way of looking at it, which is, gosh, all we want is a championship, and we spend our whole fandoms looking up to the sky for the safe that's going to fall on our heads, because it always falls on our heads. And why do we trust this guy who's never won a Super Bowl and has only been in the NFL for 2 years to make these radical changes? So, yeah, there's kind of a whipsaw dynamic there. And I think we just kind of have to let it play out. I mean, look, I grew up a Philadelphia sports fan 15, 20 years ago. When I was still just a Philadelphia sports fan, this might be making me pull my hair out and drive me nuts. But as somebody now who tries to kind of look at things from a more dispassionate perspective, I'm really interested to see how this plays out for the Eagles and also how it plays out for the Sixers, because as we said, these are similar kind of paths. The one key difference is that the Eagles were actually competitive. They had designs on challenging for a Super Bowl last year. The Sixers really didn't. And maybe we've been spoiled, if you're an Eagles fan, by how quickly Chip turned things around, winning 10 games in back-to-back seasons after the Eagles went 4-12 and were really at their low point as a franchise in a generation.
Yeah, Mike, what do you think now the expectations are of Chip Kelly in this organization? He's kind of in the middle. I mean, has he proven that he can win in the NFL? I mean, he's won 20 games, but only one playoff game. He didn't make the playoffs in his second year. What if for some reason this team doesn't make the playoffs? That would be 2 years with no playoffs. Is he proven that he's a success in the NFL?
I think he's proven so far that he's a very, very good coach, because I don't think that the Eagles have really had top of the line throughout the roster talent the way some other teams have. Yeah, you had Deshaun Jackson and Shady McCoy when he got here, but that defense is not loaded with playmakers all over the place, and you haven't had what you'd call a franchise caliber quarterback, at least one that you can say with certainty is one. Maybe Nick Foles, in 2013 when he was going, 27 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, would give you that indication. But last year he didn't do much to suggest that, this is a guy we really want to build around. So, in that regard, I think Chip has proven himself to be very sharp and a very astute head coach. The question, though, now is whether he is that sharp and that astute given full control of evaluating and acquiring talent. And that's the fascinating part. That's the part I want to see.
Yeah, and that all shakes out starting Tuesday when free agency opens, and then, of course, the draft. And, I like the fact that there's finally accountability for somebody. I don't care who it is. Just somebody accountable, because it seems like the first 2 years Chip was here, we kind of thought that he was kind of doing everything, but we're not sure. Like, no one has been held accountable for this Marcus Smith pick. And he might turn out to be able to play. Who knows? But I hate the fact that there was no accountability the last 2 years, and that now that there is, and Chip has put his neck out there, and I think you got to admire him for that ability, but he could really crash and burn, or he could lift this thing to new heights. Ultimately, I don't know how much time you've spent around Chip Kelly, but does he seem like a different guy? I mean, of all sports figures you've been around, I know you were in New York for a while as well, Mike. Is Chip Kelly a special individual when it comes to sports?
Well, I think he's daring. I think that's a good way to put it. In the same way that I think Hinkie is daring with what he's doing. I think these are guys who are completely committed to this philosophy that they're choosing to follow. And it's a philosophy that isn't necessarily going to have a franchise kind of plug along in the way that the Eagles kind of have for the last several years. Maybe you go 10-6 if you catch some breaks, and maybe you get to the NFC Championship game if you catch a few more breaks. But they're not going for that. They are going for the whole schmear. I mean, that's why if you're the Sixers, you draft Joel Embiid, even though he's going to sit out, most if not all of the following season. That's why you trade for Dario Saric, who's not going to play for a couple of years. And if you're Chip, that's why you might make a play for Marcus Mariota, because you believe that this is the guy, this is the next Brady, the next Manning, the next Rodgers, the next Breeze, who can, take your franchise, to the next level and keep it there for a long, long time. So I think for Philadelphians, that's a risky way of doing things, because we want all the assurances, we want all the results of competing for a championship and challenging for a championship without all the risk that might entail. When you've gone a generation and only won one championship in 32 years among your 4 major teams, you get a little gun shy about saying, "Hey, we're going for the whole thing, and here's how we're going to do it." I understand that, but that's the part that makes this so interesting and so fascinating. And I think if it works out, it's going to be something that Philadelphia sports fans are really going to embrace and look back on and say, wow, can you believe that we even doubted that Chip knew what he was doing? I mean, or that Sam Hinkie knew what he was doing. It doesn't mean it's going to work. It just means that it has that potential to work big.
Sure, and either way you slice it, Mike, it's really hard in the game of football to not have that quarterback and expect to be able to compete. And the Eagles have not won a game in the playoffs since McNabb left. Like him or not, he had you relevant for 10 years and won a lot of games, a lot of playoff games. No other quarterback has won a playoff game in this city since he's left. If you don't have stability at that position, it's tough to win, no matter how smart and how many great players you have on your team. This Eagle team had a lot of talent. Without a quarterback, can't win.
No, I agree with you 100%, and that's the logic behind going all in on Mariota, is that if you look around at teams that have those elite quarterbacks, guys like Brady and Rodgers and Breeze and Andrew Luck now, emerging in Indianapolis as one of those guys, clearly, those guys cover up for shortcomings that their teams have. How much time would we spend talking about Bradley Fletcher and Kerry Williams if, Tom Brady is the quarterback of the team that they're on? It doesn't mean that they're not a problem. It just means that their team is more likely to overcome them because you have that elite quarterback. So if you can't put a price on a guy like that, then why not go all in for Marcus Mariota if you know in your core or believe in your core that he's going to be one of those guys? I mean, with all due respect to Bill Belichick, who's a brilliant head coach, look at his record without Tom Brady and look at it with Tom Brady. There's something to be said for that philosophy.
Not to mention, somehow Bill Belichick thinks Patrick Chung can play, and here apparently he couldn't. It's amazing how that thing, all these things work out. I said before, Kerry Williams won a Super Bowl. It's not like the guy was a stiff. He was on the field for a team that won a Super Bowl. You put him on the field 20 extra plays every game, well, all of a sudden, he doesn't look as good. But you get that quarterback, that erases a lot. We talk about McCoy leaving. Dan Herron played LeGarrette Blount in the AFC Championship game on one side, Luck versus Brady. That helps having that position. So it shows maybe sometimes how the quarterback can kind of devalue every position on the field when he can play. We'll see what Chip does and how he gets, quote-unquote, his guys, because obviously that's who he's looking for. Mike Sielski, read the full piece at Philly.com. It's a really good article from Mike. Great job, Mike. We appreciate the time.
Anytime, Mike. Thanks for having me.
You got it.